if you want to know the story of the dramatic divorce of John and Effie Ruskin, there was a feature film made a few years ago. It was called Effie, if I remember correctly. So you can look it up. But I will give you the link to yet another BBC documentary. The title is The Scandalous Women of the 19th Century, and this is basically about some problems and some women, uh, some of whom even changed the law and or influenced the change of the law. And one of these women was called Caroline Norton, and she is quite an interesting character because she was quite instrumental in the change of the law, in the passing of the Matrimonial Causes Act of 1857, and an earlier act from 1839, so 2 years after the accession of Queen Victoria, called the Custody of Infants Act, because you might expect that many people who wanted to obtain divorce already had children together, so what would happen to those children? So the standard practice before the accession of Queen Victoria and before the passing of the Custody of Infants Act was that most courts believed that by definition a more fit parent to take care of children of any age was the father, because the father usually was left with more money, and it was believed that the father could hire any kind of servants or tutors or even wet nurses to breastfeed the infants. So if the father was well off, and these were the people who were getting the divorce, he would be more equipped to look after the children. So especially in cases when the wife was adulterous, when the wife was considered to be the guilty party, the very common practice by the rejected husbands was to take the children away from the mother and never allow them to see her again. So that was quite a common occurrence, and this happened. This was changed even before the passing of the Matrimonial Causes Act in 1839, because of the influence and the petitioning and basically the political activity and writing of a woman called Caroline Norton. You may remember, we haven't talked so much about Queen Victoria yet. We'll probably do it next week or in 2 weeks' time. But some of you may know that when Queen Victoria came to the throne, she had the first Prime Minister called Lord Melbourne, who was her mentor, who was her closest advisor and friend. Some biographies of Queen Victoria suggest there was even some sort of romantic attraction between them, but most historians believe that he was just a kind of father figure to Victoria in her youth. But why is he important here? You may recall when we talked about the Romantics that Lord Melbourne was a widower when Victoria came to the throne, and his wife had been Lady Caroline Lamb, one of the very scandalous women of the earlier generation because of her liaison with Lord Byron. Lord Melbourne actually was a very loving husband, and he forgave her and looked after her, especially in her later years. She developed a mental disorder, and she basically died as a mad woman, as it was then considered. But later, Lord Melbourne, when he was already the Prime Minister, developed a very close friendship, or perhaps even a relationship, with a lady called Caroline Norton. And before the passing of the Matrimonial Causes Act, one of the grounds for parliamentary divorce was to obtain the court ruling on the crime, very strange crime called criminal conversation. Criminal conversation was the legal jargon for adultery. So basically, the idea was that the wronged husband, so the husband of an adulterous wife, could sue in court the lover of his wife for damaged property. Exactly that, damaged property. So the wife who took a lover was damaged property, and this lover was liable to pay compensation and to give any other satisfaction to the husband if he so demanded. And the court ruling about the criminal conversation, so kind of proven adultery, was enough to petition for divorce. And this was the case with Caroline Norton and Lord Melbourne. Caroline Norton's husband sued Lord Melbourne for criminal conversation with his wife. They could not prove it, so the ruling was not given, and Lord Melbourne was not condemned. But of course, the marriage of Caroline Norton soured quite visibly. And even though she was not able to get the divorce from her husband, who was basically mistreating her, he took away her 3 sons and denied access to them. So she started to use her political influence, and she started to write petitions in order to change the law, so to make the parliament aware. This was a very English way. Something was wrong with the law, somebody was a kind of whistleblower. They tried to attract the parliament. If the parliament decided to discuss the matter, very often it resulted in the passing of the new act of law. And this was the situation with the Custody of Infants Act in 1839, which was influenced by the opinions and petitions of Caroline Norton. And her idea, her petition was that especially the younger children, the children of what she called, or what the legal language called, the tender years, the tender age, so basically the children below the age of 7, should be allowed to stay with their mother rather than to continue the practice of granting the custody to the father. So the ruling said that the children up to the age of 7 should be allowed to stay with the mother, because this was better for their development, for their psychology. And children older than 7 should be allowed at least to see their mother from time to time, so that women should not be completely removed from seeing their children. So we continue.